Hi, my name is Josh Wilbert, and this is my final video presentation for AEP 855 Educational Leadership, titled Equity in Education. The first piece of research that I'll be reviewing is titled Still Separate, Still Unequal by Cindy Long. It has been 60 years since the Supreme Court ruled to desegregate America's public schools. 6 decades later, and students of color still lag behind in education and income. Today, approximately 93% of public school students are students of color, and 66% of students are poverty-stricken. Immediately following the landmark decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, however, the dropout rate of African American students decreased 25%. And according to the article Still Separate, Still Unequal, all students attending integrated public schools in the post-civil rights era achieved at higher rates academically, and students of color experienced higher earnings, better health, and better prospects in life. According to author Cindy Long, in recent years, America's public schools have regressed to what she calls pre-Brown conditions. Nearly half of the nation's students are low income. 44% are students of color, and both populations are concentrated in segregated schools. Furthermore, according to this very same article, the vast majority of Hispanic and black students attend public institutions where the majority of the students are non-white. This is some data from that article reflecting the impact of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, 1968-69 school year and 2009-2010 school year. At the same time, 43% of Hispanic students and 38% of black students attend intensely segregated schools, where white students comprise 10% or less of the student body. Due to rising minority rates and the economic turmoil of the past decade, many neighborhoods and public schools are currently segregated by race and income. According to Long, concentrations of poor or minority students are often poor and minority go hand in hand, combined with low school performance drive middle-class families away, further distilling the concentration and exacerbating its effects. This is some data from that very same article. It's data reflecting the percentage of students on free and reduced meals and the percentage of white student population in Montgomery County, Maryland schools. And as you can see, as free and reduced meal percentage is higher, the percentage population of white students tends to be lower, and vice versa. Current achievement gap data reveals that achievement rates between low-income and high-income students are growing further and further apart. This gap is exacerbated in segregated schools where less successful peer groups and inadequate facilities and learning materials are the norm. Further research has been completed regarding economics and the ever-expanding achievement gap, as presented in the subsequent report titled The Economic Impact of the Achievement Gap in America's Schools by McKinsey & Company. According to McKinsey & Company, 4 distinct achievement gaps exist in our nation's public schools. These gaps are the United States and other nations, black and Latino students and white students, students of varying income levels, and comparable students enrolled in differing systems. McKinsey & Company suggests the underutilization of human potential in the United States is extremely costly. These avoidable shortfalls, as they call them, in academic achievement led to all of the following: low earnings, poor health, higher rates of incarceration, and lower high school graduation rates and college retention rates. The authors continue on to state that if the United States in recent years had closed the gap between its education achievement levels and those of better performing nations, GDP in 2008 could have been $1.3 to $2.3 trillion higher. Furthermore, McKinsey & Company state if the gap between black and Latino student performance and white student performance had been similarly narrowed, GDP in 2008 would have been $310 billion to $525 billion higher. Finally, the authors continue on to indicate that closing the following gaps would result in greater economic production: low and high income students, lowest and highest performing states. McKinsey and Company further state that the persistence of these educational achievement gaps imposes on the United States the economic equivalent of a permanent national recession. Moreover, the authors believe that the recurring economic costs directly correlated to the widening achievement gap are greater than that of the Great Recession and the recession of 1981-1982. And the following data highlights the previous mentioned effects of the achievement gap. To begin, this is data reflecting student performance and socioeconomic level around the world. And as you can see, the United States is right in the middle of this data, being outperformed by 17 countries. This next bit of data is test scores at the advanced level that show a wide gap and a sharp decrease over time. This data is showing white, Latino, and black students. And then finally, the income gap and its effects is persistent. And we see from primary school to high school to college that these persist over time. Again, all of the aforementioned data on achievement gap in our nation directly correlates to lower economic gains, according to McKinsey and Company. In addition, the author's research uncovered the following 5 themes. Lagging achievement is a problem for poor and minority children and the broad middle class. Inequities in teacher quality and school funding are pervasive. What happens in schools and school systems matters profoundly. Better data is essential, and there is a case for optimism. Now, with all of the data available, discussions of equity can no longer be ignored, leading to my third article that I'll be discussing, titled, Is America Ready to Talk About Equity in Education, by Tim Walker. Tim Walker likens the achievement gap in America to an opportunity gap that has been relatively ignored by lawmakers for years. However, Walker does point out that current Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, along with a group of economists and civil rights leaders, issued a report titled For Each and Every Child, and this is intended to address the socioeconomic disparities that are plaguing today's public schools. The aforementioned report stresses the federal government's role in assisting states in addressing inequities in education, and I believe the following quote summarizes the goal of Secretary Duncan and his commission. We must avoid a future that continues to consign millions of poor children to inadequate schools lacking the great teachers and principals they need. We hope to kindle a sense of urgency that is both passionate and compassionate, keeping our eyes on the prize instead of distracting ourselves in search for villains and celebrations of heroes. Now the question is, are Secretary Duncan and his commission statements a call to action, or are they simply more political rhetoric? Well, according to Walker, NEA President and Commission member Dennis Van Rokel joined Stanford professor and fellow Commission member Linda Darling-Hammond, Joe Bishop of the National Opportunity to Learn campaign, and teacher Renee Moore for a webinar sponsored by the Center for Teaching Quality and the NEA to discuss how to translate the Commission's findings into real and sustainable action. Educators across the nation are lending their voices and efforts in support of narrowing our achievement gaps by coalition building and resource sharing and working to transform their schools into community hubs, providing enrichment, not just remediation and health screenings for families, and retooling the infrastructure of schooling in America. So, the data is now available and the conversation has been broached. What challenges might an educational leader face attempting to address the achievement gaps in America? That is the title of my next section, Leadership Challenges and Solution, Addressing Inequities in Education. As Tim Walker's article stated, educators across America are working tirelessly to narrow the inequities found in our public schools today. However, one of the greatest challenges is a change to the infrastructure of schools across the nation. How do we as a country reverse the trend towards de facto segregation? Well, the aforementioned challenge may be larger than any one building, any one administrator, any one teacher can rectify. A more appropriate challenge to address might be attacking the achievement gap in schools with a high concentration of poor minority students. If we cannot control who enrolls in our schools, we do control what our students learn and how they learn it. A related challenge is meeting the needs of an increasingly diverse student population. Multicultural education has become increasingly important in the education world. According to author Peter Northouse, globalization has also created the need for leaders to become competent in cross-cultural awareness and practice. Northouse continues to stress the need for leaders to learn to relate to people from other cultures from a position of equality rather than cultural superiority. Northouse defines culture as the learned beliefs, values, rules, norms, symbols, and traditions that are common to a group of people. Administrators must lead void of prejudice and an ethnocentric attitude. Cultural groups, they're complex entities. Having knowledge of the characteristics of multiple cultures is imperative to building relationships and earning the trust from students necessary to narrow inequities in education. In addition to being culturally aware, educational leaders must be ethical. Northouse defines ethics as the kinds of values and morals an individual or society finds desirable or appropriate. Northouse continues on to identify 5 principles of ethical leadership: to respect others, serve others, show justice, manifest honesty, and build community. I believe the 5th principle of ethical leadership, building community, is essential to address inequities in education. A shared vision or common goal must be established by a learning community to address issues of equality. It is through the collaborative efforts of an entire building that such difficult obstacles can be traversed. Additionally, Lisa Delpit, author of Other People's Children, Cultural Conflict in the Classroom, addresses the issue of educating our poor and culturally diverse student population. She claims all too often teachers are exposed to descriptions of failure rather than models of success. Delpit's comments highlight a need for a shift in how our nation educates our prospective teachers. Success in addressing the achievement gap are occurring, and they must be used as training and educational tools. Delpit continues on to address a second challenge facing educators and educational leaders in a culturally diverse setting. The author encourages educators to explore their own beliefs and attitudes about non-white and non-middle class peoples. In response, Delpit further encourages educators to immerse themselves into culturally diverse communities to understand the educational values that these communities possess. Finally, Delpit identifies a third challenge or problem plaguing education today: the narrow and essentially Eurocentric curriculum we provide. The author further suggests that if we are knowledgeable of the intellectual legacies of our students, we will gain insight in how to teach them. In summation, it is the opinion of educators like Lisa Delpit and myself that if we are to successfully educate all of our children, we must work to remove the blinders built of stereotype, monocultural instructional methodologies, ignorance, social distance, biased research, and racism. We must work to destroy those blinders so that it is possible to really see, to really know the students we must teach. And that is the conclusion of my video presentation. The final slide will be my reference list.